Okay, the next item of business is a statement by Jenny Gilruth on relationships and behaviour in schools. The Cabinet Secretary will take questions at the end of her statement. Therefore, there should be no interventions or interruptions. And I call on Jenny Gilruth, Cabinet Secretary, up to 10 minutes, please.
Presiding Officer, today's update on relationships and behaviour in schools follows the progress made through the Scottish Government's and COSLA's National Action Plan, which published last August. And for members' awareness, further progress will be published, most notably on consequences before the summer recess. As Cabinet Secretary, I spend much of my time engaging with teachers and with school staff across the country. And over the past 6 months, I've hosted a series of regional events with all of Scotland's secondary head teachers from all over Scotland invited to attend, and we are now halfway through events for primary head teachers. From Dumfries to Inverness to Aberdeen, I want to again pay tribute today to the teachers in Scotland's schools who are helping to make a difference every day. Those events have been pivotal in hearing about the post-COVID challenges faced by our schools, but also in creating the conditions necessary to have frank and pragmatic conversations about the solutions from those at the chalk face. And I also stress the need to look beyond party politics today across this Parliament to collectively discuss those solutions. There is a role for each of us here to work together with the interests of our young people in mind. That is why, in advance of the publication on the Behaviour Action Plan, I engage with the opposition to hear their ideas for solutions. A further example of this approach has been the First Minister's Youth Justice Summit, where members from parties across the Parliament heard directly from young people. And there will be a further discussion taking place shortly, and I look forward to continuing that discussion with all parties. And of course, we all know that the reasons underpinning trends in behaviour are complex. Staff who responded to the Behaviour in Scotland School research highlighted the impact of wider societal factors, including poverty and deprivation and the cost of living crisis, as being the root cause for some disruptive behaviour. And because a core foundation of this government is getting it right for every child, we do have a commitment to support all young people to help them to reach their potential. I want to turn to my update today on the Relationships and Behaviour in Schools Action Plan. And importantly, the plan is jointly owned with COSLA to reflect that shared legal responsibilities that exist between the Government and our councils, who carry the statutory responsibility for running all of Scotland's schools. It was developed in collaboration with the Scottish Advisory Group on Relationships and Behaviour in Schools, meaning it was informed by our main teaching unions, the Association of Directors of Education, Education Scotland, the Association of Scottish Principal Educational Psychologists, parents' representatives and wider stakeholders. And the plan contains 20 overarching actions and 8 themes to be delivered by March 2027. The first progress report was published at the end of March, and between November 23 and March 25, good progress has been made against all actions set out in the plan. I want to take a few moments now to highlight some of that progress. We have prioritised responding to emerging areas of concern. That is why new guidance has been published on preventing and responding to gender-based violence and on mobile phones. We have also updated Respect for All, our national anti-bullying guidance, including strong messages about our expectation that all incidents of bullying should be recorded. Our national education agencies, of course, have a crucial role here. In November 2023, I announced support, spearheaded by our Interim Chief Inspector, to ensure HMI inspections help support improvements in behaviour in our schools. As part of their inspections, every school in Scotland is now receiving enhanced feedback on relationships and behaviour. Education Scotland has also been supporting local authorities and schools with bespoke professional learning, tailored to the needs of their staff on topics such as expectations and consequences and de-escalation. Practical resources to support staff on specific topics have also been developed. This includes updating the Keep Your Cool in School Guide, a programme that uses discussion and reflection to equip primary school-aged children to recognise and manage strong emotions. As part of the Violence Prevention Framework, partners in the third sector have launched the Quit Fighting for Likes campaign. That includes a suite of resources for teachers to engage young people in conversations aimed at preventing the filming and sharing of violent incidents on social media. Now, this is just a snapshot of some of the action that is detailed more fully within the progress report, which I'm sure members have engaged with. Today I want to focus on our next steps within the action plan, with particular reference to 2 areas I know are of specific concern to members across the chamber. Those are increases in gender-based violence and responding to the most challenging behaviour in our schools. And like many across the Chamber, I was deeply concerned by the recent NASUWT and EIS findings on the experiences of female teachers and staff, which echoes our own BISR research. And I would have to say, as a female politician, that it is sadly also reflective of some of the types of experiences encountered by women in politics in 2025. That is because our classrooms, in my view, can act to hold up a mirror to who we are as a society. We should not divorce wider societal shifts from behaviour in Scotland's schools, therefore. Gender-based violence should not be tolerated in our society. Important conversations are needed about how to address the attitudes that are influencing this, and I welcomed my most recent meeting with the NASUWT to that end on Friday when I attended their conference. I've already highlighted the good work on the gender-based violence framework, which launched last year. We're also continuing our investment in the Mentors in Violence Prevention and Equally Safe at Schools programmes, which are aimed at addressing violence against women and girls. But I am particularly concerned about the impact of online content. In January, I was fortunate to attend the launch of the new Digital Discourse Initiative. The free resource provides practical strategies and curriculum tools to help support school staff to challenge online hate and disinformation. And I heard first-hand from staff and from pupils at Cathkin High School about how helpful that resource has been in aiding understanding of terminology and providing practical tools to address those issues in schools. As part of the programme for government, we have committed further to supporting this initiative. Beyond gender-based violence, we know that the rise of extremism and far-right ideology across wider society is having a detrimental impact on our young people. This was a concern shared by the teaching trade unions when I met with them all yesterday as part of our professional association forum. And as I confirmed at last Friday's NASUWT conference, I have committed to engage further on this topic, building on the gathering the First Minister held 2 weeks ago to understand the role of our education system in tackling the harms of the far right. Today, I extend an invitation to all MSPs to be part of that alliance and to work collectively with government to tackle the threat of the far right, and particularly the threat extremism brings to women in society. Presiding Officer, I want to turn now to the steps that we are taking to respond to the most serious behaviours in our schools. This year, as part of our broader investment in violence prevention, we are investing £2 million to address youth violence, the carrying of weapons and violence in and around our schools. This brings our total investment to more than £6 million since 2023. This investment supports Medics Against Violence to engage with young people in schools and youth clubs to address the consequences in our schools in relation to knife carrying and knife injuries. It also supports Youthlink Scotland to deliver No Knives, Better Lives, to develop resources and deliver training sessions to hundreds of practitioners and young people. And I recognise the findings of BISR, reinforced by our relationships and behaviour summits, that staff can feel disempowered from using consequences. However, I am absolutely clear that consequences are an essential part of a supportive learning environment. Now, we will publish new guidance on consequences, as I previously mentioned, before the summer recess, and I will update Parliament then. I also recognise the concerns raised about potential under-reporting of incidents, as well as the variation in practice around local authorities. As mentioned, we have already refreshed guidance on the recording of bullying incidents, and during Phase 2 of the plan, we will undertake a broader review of processes for recording incidents, including violent incidents, to identify potential means of streamlining processes and improving consistency. And central to all of this, of course, our schools and our school workforce remains. In recognition of their importance, we are investing an additional £29 million in this year's budget to support provision of the additional support needs workforce in our schools. This resource will be helped to use to support the recruitment, retention and training of the whole of the inclusion workforce. Presiding Officer, I am aware of how much interest there is, quite rightly, in this topic across the Chamber. That is why I engaged ahead of the publication of the National Action Plan with all parties on their suggestions for improvements. I hope party spokespeople can see perhaps some of those suggestions reflected in the National Action Plan and in our progress to date. In a similar spirit, as we enter Phase 2 of the plan, I am keen to engage on developing further solutions so that we can collectively consider how these might be integrated within the plan. Today I have set out the progress that has been made during the first 9 months of the Action Plan and my commitment to further action. I hope members across the Chamber can share this commitment as we move to the next phase of the Action Plan. I know that all of us here share the ambition that our schools are safe and consistent learning environments to help support Scotland's young people and, in so doing, Scotland's teachers. Presiding Officer.
Thank you. The Cabinet Secretary will now take questions on the issues raised in her statement. There will be around 20 minutes for that, after which we'll need to move to the next item of business. And I would encourage members wishing to ask a question to press the request to speak buttons and call first Miles Briggs.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. And can I start by thanking the Cabinet Secretary for advance sight of the statement. At a time when teaching unions are reporting record levels of violence in our classrooms and teachers are requesting self-defence training, I continue to have deep concerns that this plan and what's been outlined today is not going to end violence in our classrooms and schools. Teachers and parents I've spoken with said they haven't even heard of the Relationship and Behaviour in Schools Action Plan. And so ministers have a long way to go to demonstrate and give confidence that, to teachers and our school communities, that this plan is going to deliver the safe school environments that we all want to see. Teachers want to know that they will be supported, and any decisions on disruptive and violent pupils that they cannot manage in the classroom will be respected, including by council management. Now, the Cabinet Secretary says that consequences are an essential part of a supportive learning environment, and I agree. One of the action plan outcomes was that school staff should feel confident to report, record, monitor, assess and respond to individual incidents and patterns of behaviour. Therefore, can I ask the Cabinet Secretary, will the new guidance on consequences include a presumption that if a pupil has been violent towards a member of staff, including classroom assistants, which I believe is not being recorded, they will not be kept in the classroom until their behaviour changes?
Cabinet Secretary.
I thank Miles Briggs for his questions. He raises a number of important points. I will try to summarise them all. Forgive me if I forget any of them. I'm more than happy to meet with the member and talk to these issues at length. I met substantively with the teaching unions yesterday in advance of the committee session we both attended last night for 2 hours to talk to some of these broader issues in relation to the challenges in our classrooms. And the NASUWT's research on this, actually, in addition to that of the EIS's, has been really seminal to helping to support the National Action Plan. Like, I hear the challenge from Mr Briggs in terms of where the action plan is now. I hope he understands the tone I am taking today in continuing to engage with opposition parties on this. We've got to get it right, and I recognise that. And I engaged very substantively with Mr Kerr, his predecessor, on this, and he was at the table engaging with other parties and me on that draft action plan. But as we approach Part 2, and part of my response today was to set out there will be further information coming in relation to consequences. I'm more than happy to engage with him as well on that. He is absolutely correct to say that teachers must be supported in our schools. He will know I take this issue very seriously, having come from the classroom myself. And he spoke about the role of council or school management in that. And he will also know some of my frustrations as Education Secretary in relation to the different responsibilities of government in this space and that of local authorities stipulated in law. But we have shared legal responsibilities, which is exactly why the National Action Plan ties COSLA to this work. He also, Presiding Officer, raised an issue around about parents and the lack of understanding or knowledge even of the plan, which I accept. This was a point, again, raised by Mike Corbett of the NASUWT, and on the back of that point, which I discussed with him extensively, Councillor Tony Buchanan, the education representative from COSLA, and I wrote to the Association of Directors of Education across the country to help support that confidence raising. We need to use the National Action Plan to help inform behaviour policy in our schools. So I will continue my work on that, but I would also welcome the members' support on that as well. Every school I go into, I am constantly surprised and amazed by some of the approaches that are being used. But we need to ensure that action plan is giving the support where it's needed. And of course, the budget also, as I mentioned, provides extra funding for additional support for learning, which was a key ask from the teaching trade unions. He asked a final question in relation to cyber risks and violent behaviour. I'm happy to take that away because, of course, the point around consequences won't publish for the next coming weeks. So I don't want to prejudge the outcome of that work. But my firm expectation would be in agreement with the point that the member has made today.
Pam Duncan-Glancy.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. The Cabinet Secretary said today that staff need to feel supported to manage behaviour, and I agree. But that support must be systemic, not sticking plasters. Staff are exhausted, stressed, under-resourced and being asked to deliver a national behaviour strategy whilst ASN provision is stretched and wider support services have vanished. In too many cases, violence in schools has become expected, just seen as part of the job. Parliament passed a motion in my name last year calling for a national workforce plan. That motion passed, but the Government hasn't yet delivered. This action plan is too little, too late. And the Cabinet Secretary talks about working across parties. The Parliament passed a motion which was cross-party supported. So why hasn't the workforce plan been published? And how can phase 2 of the strategy work when the workforce it relies on still lacks the support it needs?
Cabinet Secretary.
I thank the member for her interest in this matter. I agree with her. This has got to be systemic and it isn't about sticking plasters. In terms of the strategy, I'm not sure I would agree with the point the member makes in relation to teachers being asked to deliver a strategy. This is a plan to support our classroom teachers and our middle leaders and our leaders in schools. And it's not a plan I've come up with on my own. It's a plan jointly owned with COSLA and with the teaching trade unions. They have fed into this work and they have told government and local authorities the exact type of support their members need. And I think that gives it a strength to it and helps, and it should be helping, to support the profession. She mentioned a motion that was voted for some time ago now in relation to workforce planning. That work is being taken forward to give her some reassurance here. Some of the issues I experienced, though, as the member will know, and I think as we discussed yesterday evening, it doesn't feel that long ago that we last spoke, relate to the legal responsibilities that rest with COSLA, our local government, as an employer. So we need to work with COSLA in relation to that work. That's being progressed, though, to give her some reassurance as part of the Education and Assurance Board, which was a key kind of component part of the budget agreement, of course, with COSLA, that gave them extra funding for teacher numbers and for ASN, and that's so important. I'm not sure what the member is saying to me, but I'm more than happy to catch her after the question session, Presiding Officer, to discuss this in further detail.
Thank you. I'm aware there are around 13 colleagues wishing to ask questions and around 14 minutes in which to ask them, so I'd welcome brevity in both the questions and the responses. I've got first Kenneth Gibson, to be followed by Ros McCall.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I welcome the Cabinet Secretary's statement. Pupils are well aware that there are few, if any, tangible consequences to bad behaviour. It's obvious that allowing persistently disruptive pupils to remain in classrooms, seemingly come what may, is not working for staff and well-behaved pupils who are undermined by constant disruption, which makes learning difficult, sometimes impossible. Cabinet Secretary, it is time to remove persistently disruptive pupils from classrooms to where their behaviour can be closely monitored with an opportunity to return should their behaviour improve. Will the consequential improvements that she's looking to deliver be in place for the autumn term?
That's not what we're looking for in brevity in questions, but Cabinet Secretary.
I sincerely hope, to the member's question, that these improvements will be in place for the autumn term. I spoke, I think, in response to Mr Briggs about the further work that will be published before the end of the summer recess in relation to consequences, which is exactly the point the member is making. And it is worthwhile recounting that teachers in Scotland can already take a range of different actions in responding to disruptive behaviour. And at its furthest extreme, exclusion does remain an option open to Scotland's teachers. Now, as I set out in my statement, we will publish that new guidance on consequences before summer, and I am very clear that consequences are an essential part of a supportive learning environment, and I will provide more information on our approach to that end when we publish this guidance in June.
Ros McCall, to be followed by Karen Adam.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I know and welcome that the Cabinet Secretary has come to the conclusion that consequences are an essential part of a supportive learning environment. I think it's 2.5 years since we first mentioned it, but we have recently seen examples of head teachers taking decisions to limit mobile phones in classrooms, but I note that the connection from mobile phone use and behaviour has not been fully included in the statement. So does the Cabinet Secretary agree that use of such devices, unchecked content, is contributing to aggressive behaviour in some pupils in our schools, and that needs to be highlighted?
Cabinet Secretary.
I very much agree with the sentiment of the member's question, although I'm not sure I've taken 2.5 years to come to the conclusion that consequences are required in our schools, having come from a classroom myself. Consequences and rules are very important when you are delivering education, particularly to a large group of unruly young people. Now, in relation to the point the member makes in terms of mobile phones and behaviour, these things are absolutely linked, and I agree with the member's point. I didn't explicitly reference, I think I made one reference to the updated mobile phone guidance in my statement, but not on the point in relation to behaviour. So to give her that reassurance, I absolutely accept that these things are linked. I noted actually, I think last week, that a couple of schools in Edinburgh are now moving forward with full bans. That follows a policy approach that I think has been adopted by Perth and Kinross Council. So there are now schools looking at the national approach to banning mobile phones, which empowers head teachers to take that decision, and rolling it out across the country. That's the approach I think that works best in Scotland because of those shared legal responsibilities. I cannot, as Cabinet Secretary, enforce a national ban. What I can do is set out very clear national guidance that empowers head teachers to choose to ban mobile phones if they see fit. And I think it's welcome news that we're starting to see real progress to that end.
Karen Adam, to be followed by Martin Whitfield.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can the Cabinet Secretary please outline how the programme for government that was announced this week by the First Minister will support children and young people with ASN as they navigate an ever-changing school environment?
Cabinet Secretary.
So I am very clear that all children and young people are entitled to the support that they need to reach their full potential, and we have committed £26 million of funding each year, so £50 million for support assistance plus £11 million to our grant-aided schools and other grants to support this. The programme for government commits an additional £29 million to support the recruitment and retention and training of our additional support needs workforce via local and national programmes, and further, we will hold a data summit with all local authorities to support improved consistency of identification, support and reporting of children's needs at local level. We know this has been a challenge historically in relation to inconsistent data gathering, so it's important that we have that national consistency in terms of data gathering and how the government monitors and supports local authorities in relation to additional support for learning.
Martin Whitfield, to be followed by Claire Hawkey.
I'm very grateful, Deputy Presiding Officer. Does the Cabinet Secretary share my disappointment that after 18 years we can still only talk about ambition that our schools be safe and consistent rather than having safe and consistent schools?
Cabinet Secretary.
I'm sure the member, although he is perhaps a little bit older than I, was at school sometime in the past, and there were incidents that happened when he was at school. They certainly were when I was at school. So I'm not necessarily sure we're living in a different age 18 years after my party came to power, although I accept that's the point the member made. I think there are challenges in our classrooms, some of which predate COVID, but some of which have undoubtedly been compounded by COVID. We also have seen the onset of austerity in our classrooms, and that is harming behaviour. I hear that in evidence from the third sector, but also from our teaching trade unions. And one of the points I've been making at our head teacher regional events is the way in which, and he will know this as a former teacher, of course, education and delivery of education has changed in recent years. So we now have, for example, food banks in our schools. We have the availability of clothing banks in our schools. The nature of that support around our schools, I think, has changed. So I'm mindful of that challenge, and I'm thinking about the support we give our schools and how that might have to adapt in the future. But more broadly, of course, it is an ambition that our schools are safe and consistent learning environments. I'm not necessarily sure I would accept that that's changed in the past 18 years, to the member's point.
Claire Hawkey, to be followed by Ross Greer. Can we have Ms Hawkey's microphone, please?
Donna. Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm sure many in Chamber will join me in welcoming key education announcements from this week's programme for government. Can the Cabinet Secretary outline what the programme for government will do to address behaviour and improve standards in schools specifically?
Cabinet Secretary.
The programme for government makes a number of additional contributions in relation to funding to enhance, for example, the number of teachers in our schools, and we know that having a full staffing complement is hugely important. But the extra funding I spoke to in relation to, I think, a previous question on additional support for learning is specifically tailored to give that additionality in terms of trained specialist staff. We know there are challenges in that regard. Whilst, for example, historically we've seen our pupil support population increasing, we know that there are fewer, for example, additional support for learning teachers. So that extra funding that's coming from the government is designed to allow local authorities to have the power to choose to invest in specialist provision to help support the workforce.
Ross Greer, to be followed by Willie Rennie.
Thank you. I'm glad this update had such a focus on gender-based violence. It's essential that we talk with boys and young men about the importance of consent in relationships, and the new version of the Sex and Relationship Education Guidance for Teachers, which the Cabinet Secretary and I were involved in drafting, does that. But it's been delayed again. So can I ask the Cabinet Secretary, will that be published in time for schools returning in August?
Cabinet Secretary.
To give the member confirmation, it is my expectation that there will be an update, but I'm more than happy to write to him or to meet with him on that point, and I recognise some of the challenge here and his interest specifically in this matter.
Willie Rennie, to be followed by Rona Mackay.
I understand that violence in schools won't stop immediately, but for teachers and staff, the situation is getting worse, not better. And it's really frustrating that the timetable for this plan has already slipped, with the guidance on consequences not being published for months yet. Can the Cabinet Secretary assure teachers and staff that there will be no further slippage?
Cabinet Secretary.
I thank the member for his point. I'm not necessarily sure there has been slippage. In relation to the work on consequences, that was a direct ask from Sagrabis. So this is COSLA and our teaching trade unions and our partners. We have to collectively agree it. But it will be published in the coming weeks before the end of term to give the member some comfort. And I've been very clear that there's a need for it to publish before the end of term so that when schools return in August, they can use that updated guidance at their inset days to help inform better practice in our schools.
Rona Mackay to be followed by Douglas Ross.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Following from my colleague Ross Greer's question, abuse, violence or harassment of any kind, particularly gender-based violence, shouldn't be tolerated in our society and certainly not in our education environments. Can the Cabinet Secretary outline what steps the Scottish Government is taking to address these issues, particularly in schools, and in support of the Equally Safe strategy?
Cabinet Secretary.
The Scottish Government absolutely agrees that gender-based violence of any kind is unacceptable anywhere in our society, including within our education settings, and that is why we are implementing our Equally Safe strategy to prevent and eradicate such violence and harassment. Our Equally Safe delivery plan contains commitments from ADES to ensure all secondary schools sign up to the Equally Safe at School work, encourage the development of peer learning and activity around gender-based violence in schools, and also ensure that all staff complete trauma awareness training. And as of January this year, 133 schools have signed up to the Equally Safe at School programme. And this is a whole school approach to tackling gender inequality and gender-based violence. We have also published, though, the National Framework for Schools to help tackle sexual harassment and gender-based violence, which, as I mentioned in my statement, is a wider societal challenge at this time.
Douglas Ross to be followed by Jackie Dunbar.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Challenging behaviour in relationships can be difficult for all teachers and staff, but particularly supply teachers who don't necessarily have the opportunity to build up a rapport with their students. We know that the Cabinet Secretary met with Scottish Teachers for Permanence back in November. I understand at that meeting she committed to meeting with them again and also arranging a meeting with COSLA. They tell me, despite requests, they've not had an update on that. Will the Cabinet Secretary agree to meet with them urgently to discuss this issue and also their recent survey?
Cabinet Secretary.
I thank Mr Ross for his question. I think his point in relation to supply is pertinent, and we've got real challenges at the current time in relation to that issue of permanence. So if we look across the country, around about 80% of all teaching jobs are permanent, and that's stayed pretty static since 2014. But at local authority level, I think there are undoubtedly challenges. I have engaged with the group the member has alluded to. I'm happy to engage with all partners on this. Substantively, though, I do engage with our teaching trade unions. I engaged with them yesterday for 2 hours on a range of different issues, but we had a significant contribution from the teaching trade unions on this issue and the way in which it affects their members in terms of that uncertainty, which I am very alive to. We have to work with local authorities on this, recognising their responsibilities in law, and I will continue to engage with the teaching trade unions to that end.
Jackie Dunbar to be followed by Neil Bibby.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I understand that the EIS noted in February that the rise in violent incidents in schools has steadily increased since the onset of UK Government-imposed austerity. This is yet a further example of the harm which UK Government policies cause in Scotland. Can she outline what steps the Scottish Government are taking to tackle the sustained impact of austerity on our young people?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I think Mr Dunbar raises some important points. We know that UK Government welfare cuts have caused wide-ranging damage to the lives and outcomes of children and young people across the UK, including in Scotland. Well, I hear some chuntering from the benches to my left, but the End Child Poverty Coalition estimate that the two-child cap alone pulled 30,000 children into poverty in the UK between Labour being elected only in June of last year and the 5th of April this year, while the Department for Work and Pensions' own figures show that proposed welfare cuts for disabled people will drive 50,000 more children into poverty. Now, we've committed around £1.4 billion to mitigate the impact of 15 years of UK Government policies such as the bedroom tax, the benefit cap, and because the UK Government has failed to act, we've also committed to develop the systems needed to effectively scrap the impact of the two-child cap by April 2026.
3 additional members who wish to ask questions. I will get them all in, but they will need to be brief, as will the responses. First, Neil Bibby, to be followed by Ash Regan.
When does the Cabinet Secretary expect the prevalence of violence in our schools to be reduced? And why has the number of exclusions fallen on this Government's watch when the levels of violence have increased?
Cabinet Secretary.
I thank the member for his question. In relation to the point he raises on exclusions, there is some reticence, we know, from the profession in relation to reporting. This was a point I addressed in the Chamber in November 2023 in responding to the Behaviour in Scotland Schools research. At that time, I was very clear in calling on the profession for clearer reporting, but we need to give the profession confidence to that end that they will have support. There is updated guidance in relation to reporting that will be published as part of the updated work on consequences before the end of term to help give that support to the profession, because exclusion does exist as a consequence and we need staff to feel empowered as and when appropriate to understand that that exists as an option for them to use.
Ash Regan, to be followed by Stephen Kerr.
A national smartphone ban across all school estates, a single national behaviour standard, clear lawful guidance based on biological sex and safeguarding policies that are no longer dictated by activist-driven disinformation.
Cabinet Secretary.
There are a number of points raised there, Presiding Officer. I'm conscious of time in relation to the point on mobile phones, though I think, as I made reference to in my response to Ros McCall, I don't, as Cabinet Secretary, have the legal power to enforce a national ban on mobile phones. What I can do is set out very clear national guidance. That's what we have done, which essentially says to head teachers that we trust them to enforce bans in their school as and when they see appropriate. And it's good to see that that's already starting to have an impact, including, of course, in schools in Edinburgh.
Thank you. And Stephen Kerr.
And how the Cabinet Secretary can say that we're making good progress in this area at all, because the delayed guidance on consequences, that was supposed to be in phase 1, that's delayed. We still don't even have a definition for what violence or misbehaviour actually is. The wellbeing group that was supposed to meet about staff welfare hasn't even met yet. Hasn't even met. And then we still don't have any idea about mandatory reporting.
Question.
There is no progress in these vital areas that should have been a priority. Why is she not frustrated with her own lack of progress?
Cabinet Secretary.
I'm not sure I'm going to accept Mr Kerr's characterisation of the progress that has been made, because there has been progress made against all 20 of the measurements. I have it here in front of me. I'm conscious of time, Presiding Officer, so I'm not going to read it out for Mr Kerr. But he needs to accept that progress is being made and further progress is coming. Well, I see him shaking his head, Presiding Officer, but I want to ensure that he understands further progress is coming. There will be progress before the end of the summer term on consequences, which I know is an issue he's interested in. There will be progress in relation to our anti-racism work. We are going to develop further interim guidance ahead of the summer, and of course on risk assessments where there are incidents of harm, and the trade unions have welcomed this work. They are part of forming that guidance and that support. I hope the member is welcoming the progress. I can hear him chuntering, but I'm more than happy to share this action plan, although I would point to the GIQ, which published some weeks ago now and sets it out in more detail.
Thank you. That concludes the ministerial statement. There will be a brief pause before we move to the next item of business to allow the front benches to change.